Okay, so let's dive into a topic that I think a lot of people have heard about, but maybe don't fully understand, and that's the Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
We hear that term,
Hmm.
but how much do we really know
Yeah.
about what happened?
Right.
The events that led up to it, the unique ways each tribe was impacted. That's what we're going to unpack today. Not just the what, but the how and the why.
It's a story that really challenges, I think, a lot of the common assumptions that people have about Native Americans in the early 19th century.
Yeah, we often picture, Native American tribes as isolated,
Right.
disconnected from broader American society.
Yeah.
But in reality, many of these southeastern tribes were very integrated into the regional economy.
Yeah.
They were farmers, traders,
It's slave owners.
Yeah, slave owners.
It's a fact that often surprises people.
Yeah, it's not something you really hear about very often.
But it's crucial for understanding the power dynamics at play, because these weren't just, passive victims of westward expansion. These were active participants in the Southern economy, and that made their removal all the more complex and contested.
So before we get to Andrew Jackson, who everyone kind of associates with this,
Yeah.
what were the forces already at play that were kind of pushing for this Native American removal?
Well, picture the South in the early 1800s. The invention of the cotton gin had turned cotton into a cash crop.
Right.
And it fueled this just relentless hunger for land. And that land, of course, belonged to Native American tribes.
So the classic story of expansion and displacement.
Exactly.
But there was also this idea of the vanishing Indian
Oh, absolutely.
floating around at the time.
This myth, popularized by authors like James Fenimore Cooper,
Right. The last of the Mohicans.
exactly suggested that Native American decline was inevitable.
Right.
It was a natural consequence of progress.
Uh-huh.
And it's, tragically a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Because this belief that their disappearance was preordained
Yeah.
made it that much easier to justify policies that actively pushed them off their lands.
So you're saying that this idea created a climate where removal seemed not only acceptable, but almost like destined to happen.
Precisely. And it's important to understand that the Trail of Tears wasn't just about one man, Andrew Jackson,
Right.
although he certainly played a pivotal role.
Sure.
It was the culmination of decades of policies and attitudes that chipped away at Native American land rights and sovereignty.
So Jackson kind of steps into this already charged environment.
Yeah.
What was his stance on removal, and how did it maybe differ from those who came before him?
Well, Jackson inherited a very complex situation.
Yeah.
Previous presidents had pursued removal through treaties and negotiations, often with mixed results.
Uh-huh.
But Jackson took a much more impressive approach, using military force and executive power to expedite the process.
So less diplomacy, more just like forcing it.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And his motivations are still debated by historians.
Well-
Some argue that he genuinely believed that removal was in the best interests of Native Americans,
Okay.
protecting them from conflict with white settlers.
Okay.
Others see him as a ruthless expansionist who saw tribes as obstacles to manifest destiny.
It's fascinating how one, historical figure can be viewed so differently.
Oh, absolutely.
And I guess we'll never know what his true intentions were.
Yeah.
But regardless, the consequences were devastating.
Absolutely. And to understand the full scope of those consequences, we need to look at how each tribe experienced removal,
Right.
starting with the Choctaw, who were the first to be forced west.
Their story is really important because it kind of served as a model, for better or for worse,
Yeah.
for all the removals that followed.
It did.
So what made their experience unique?
Well, the removal was marked by this combination of coercion and attempts at negotiation.
Go.
They faced immense pressure to sign treaties ceding their land, and when resistance arose, they were met with military force.
I was reading Chief George W. Harkin's farewell letter to the American people.
Oh.
And it's heartbreaking the way he expresses their sense of betrayal, but also their hope for freedom in this new land.
It's a testament to their resilience, their ability to hold on to their dignity, even in the face of such injustice.
Yeah.
But their journey west was brutal.
Yeah.
Thousands died from disease, starvation, and exposure along the way.
So it wasn't just a relocation. It was almost like a death march for a lot of them.
Yeah, for many it was.
Yeah.
And the Seminoles, they faced a different kind of challenge altogether. They were fiercely determined to stay in their Florida homeland, and they waged a protracted war against the U.S. Army.
The Second Seminole War.
That's right.
And they used their knowledge of the Everglades to kind of evade capture.
Exactly. They used guerrilla tactics
Yeah.
and their knowledge of the Everglades to really, just evade capture and make it incredibly difficult.
And they were also joined by escaped slaves who had sought refuge
Yes.
among the Seminoles.
That's a really remarkable aspect of their story.
Yeah, so they were fighting for their own freedom,
Right.
but also providing a haven for others seeking liberation.
It highlights the complex dynamics of the time and the fact that resistance took many forms.
And so while many Seminoles were forced west,
Yeah.
a small group remained in the Everglades, and their descendants make up the Seminole Nation of Florida today.
A symbol of enduring resistance
Yeah.
in the face of overwhelming odds.
We also can't forget the Creek and the Chickasaw, who each faced their own unique trials during removal.
Yeah. The Creek, like many tribes, were forced to cede land repeatedly through treaties, often under duress.
Uh-huh.
There's a particularly tragic story of William McIntosh,
Oh, yeah.
a Creek chief who signed a treaty ceding land and was assassinated for it.
Wow.
It highlights the internal divisions and conflicts that arose from these forced removals.
So even within the tribes, there were these impossible choices and devastating consequences.
Yeah.
The Chickasaw, while they did receive financial compensation for their land, which they used to purchase territory from the Choctaw, they still faced the trauma of displacement
Of course.
and the challenge of rebuilding their lives
Absolutely.
in a new and unfamiliar environment.
Yeah.
It seems like every tribe had to navigate these just impossible choices
Yeah.
and find their own way to survive.
Absolutely.
But the Cherokee removal is perhaps the most well-known, largely due to the devastating conditions of the forced marches.
Right.
But before we get into that, we should talk about the Treaty of New Echota
Yes.
and how that kind of set the stage for the Cherokees' tragic journey.
Yeah, this treaty signed in 1835 became a major flashpoint in the removal saga. It essentially gave the Cherokee 2 years to move to Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma.
Okay.
However, it was signed by a minority faction
Oh, wow.
and vehemently opposed by the majority of the Cherokee people, including their principal chief, John Ross.
That's incredible. So the majority of the Cherokee people didn't even agree to this.
Exactly. It was very controversial.
Wow. What happened next?
Well over 16,000 Cherokees signed a petition urging Congress to void the treaty.
Wow.
It was a powerful display of resistance.
Yeah.
But despite their efforts, the treaty was ratified,
Oh.
setting in motion the events that would forever be etched in history as the Trail of Tears.
And it's with the Cherokee that we see that term Trail of Tears most closely associated.
Right.
And we'll delve into their story in more detail in just a moment. We were talking about the Treaty of New Echota and how that kind of set the stage for the Cherokees' forced removal.
Right.
And one thing that's so interesting to me is that the Cherokee, unlike some of the other tribes we talked about, actually attempted to fight their removal through the U.S. legal system.
Yeah, they took their case all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yep.
Which is a testament to their, understanding of and belief in American law.
Yeah, I remember learning about these cases back in school, Cherokee Nation v. Georgia
Right.
and Worcester v. Georgia, but to be honest, I don't really remember what happened.
Yeah.
Can you remind us, what was at stake in these cases and how they played out?
Well, in Cherokee Nation v. Georgia, the Cherokee Nation sought to assert its sovereignty and challenge Georgia's attempts to extend its laws over Cherokee territory.
Okay.
The Supreme Court, however, ruled that the Cherokee Nation wasn't a foreign nation in the traditional sense,
Okay.
and therefore couldn't sue in federal court.
So a setback, but not a complete defeat.
Exactly. And then came Worcester v. Georgia,
Okay.
which, had the potential to be a real game changer.
Yeah.
This time the court ruled in favor of the Cherokee,
Oh, wow.
affirming their right to self-government and stating that Georgia couldn't impose its laws on Cherokee land.
So that sounds like a major victory.
It was.
Did that stop their removal?
Sadly, no. And this is where the limitations of the judicial system,
Right.
especially when faced with executive power, become very apparent.
Mm-hmm.
President Jackson famously defied the Supreme Court's ruling,
He did.
allegedly saying, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it.
Wow. Talk about an executive power move.
Mhm.
So even with the highest court in the land on their side,
Yeah.
they were still forced out.
Unfortunately, yes. Jackson ignored the ruling and proceeded with the removal plans.
Wow.
The Cherokee were left with, very few options.
Yeah.
And ultimately had to face the devastating reality of the forced marches.
And these marches are what most people picture, I think, when they hear the term Trail of Tears.
Right.
These images of thousands of Cherokee being driven from their homes,
Yeah.
walking hundreds of miles in just harsh conditions.
Exactly. And it's important to understand that the term Trail of Tears encompasses more than just the physical journey.
Right.
It represents the profound sense of loss, the cultural upheaval,
Uh-huh.
the intergenerational trauma that resulted from this forced displacement.
So could you paint a picture for us of what those marches were actually like? What did they face?
Imagine being forced from your home, leaving behind everything you've ever known with just the clothes on your back and whatever meager possessions you could carry.
Yeah.
Then imagine being herded along with thousands of others, walking for months through unforgiving terrain, often in freezing temperatures, with little food, inadequate clothing, and no proper shelter.
I can't even imagine.
And it wasn't just the physical hardship.
Right.
There was the constant fear of disease, the grief of losing loved ones along the way, and the deep psychological trauma of being torn from your ancestral land and stripped of your cultural identity.
And there were accounts from soldiers who participated in the removal,
Right.
describing it as the cruelest work I ever knew.
These firsthand accounts are essential for understanding the human toll of these events.
Yeah.
They remind us that this wasn't just a political decision or a land grab. It was a tragedy that shattered lives and communities.
And it's just heartbreaking to think about the children, the elderly, the sick,
Yeah.
who were forced to endure this journey. What happened to those who couldn't keep up or who fell ill along the way?
Many died.
Yeah.
They were buried in unmarked graves along the trail, their stories lost to history.
It's just awful.
The exact number of those who perished during the removal is still debated, but estimates range in the thousands.
And they were charged, exorbitant fees to cross the Ohio River.
Right.
Forced to wait under Mantle Rock in freezing conditions. It's like they were being punished for simply existing.
It speaks to the dehumanizing nature of the entire enterprise.
Yeah.
These weren't seen as individuals with rights and dignity, but as obstacles to be removed, costs to be minimized.
So we've talked about the brutal realities of the Trail of Tears.
Right.
But we should also acknowledge, I think, the acts of resistance and resilience that emerged.
Absolutely. The Cherokee people never gave up hope.
Yeah.
Some, like those who resided on land owned by a white man adopted into the tribe, managed to avoid removal altogether.
Oh, wow.
Others chose to travel by water, hoping for a less arduous journey.
So even in the face of such despair, they found ways to kind of take control.
Yeah, to exert some agency over their fate.
And I think about that petition that they sent to Congress, signed by thousands, pleading for their right to remain on their land. That act of defiance, even though it failed, is incredible.
It's a testament to their unwavering spirit.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can find ways to resist and persevere.
Absolutely.
But the trauma of the Trail of Tears had a profound and lasting impact on the Cherokee people, and its legacy continues to shape their lives today.
That's right. We can't underestimate the long-term consequences of this forced removal.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about physical displacement. It was about the disruption of entire cultures, the severing of deep-rooted connections to the land, and the imposition of foreign values and systems.
And this disruption wasn't limited to the Cherokee.
No.
All 5 tribes that we've talked about experienced this cultural upheaval and the resulting trauma.
Absolutely. Each tribe, while possessing its own unique culture and history, face similar challenges in preserving their traditions and rebuilding their lives in a new and often hostile environment.
It's almost impossible to grasp the full scope of that loss. How did this trauma manifest in the lives of these tribes, and how does it continue to impact them today?
Well, the forced removal resulted in a profound loss of identity. Of belonging, of something truly fundamental to the human experience.
Yeah.
Imagine being torn from the land where your ancestors have lived for generations, where your history is embedded in the very landscape.
Yeah.
That loss echoes through generations.
So we're not just talking about a historical event.
No.
We're talking about a wound that continues to affect Native American communities.
Exactly. The trauma of the Trail of Tears is passed down through families, through stories, through a collective memory of pain and injustice.
How does this trauma manifest itself today?
It can manifest in a variety of ways: in health disparities, in economic struggles, in the erosion of traditional knowledge and practices, and in the ongoing fight for recognition and sovereignty.
Right.
It's a complex issue.
Yeah.
And we need to be mindful of the sensitivities involved when discussing it.
It seems like the Trail of Tears wasn't just a moment in time, but a turning point that continues to shape the lives of Native Americans today.
Yeah.
And it raises so many questions about healing reconciliation and the responsibility of the U.S. government in addressing this historical trauma.
Absolutely. Those are all important questions, and I think they're ones that we need to continue to grapple with as a nation.
I agree. And it's something that we should all be thinking about and learning more about.
For sure.
So we've been talking about the Trail of Tears
Right.
and the lasting impact it's had on Native American communities.
Yeah.
And it really raises a complicated question, I think, for me. Was it ethnic cleansing or was it genocide?
Right.
The lines seem really blurry to me.
Yeah, it's a question that has sparked really heated debate among historians and legal scholars for decades.
Right.
And honestly, there are valid points to be made on both sides to really understand it. I think we need to unpack the definitions of these terms and see how they align with the historical context.
So let's start with the basics. What's the difference between ethnic cleansing and genocide?
So ethnic cleansing generally refers to the forced removal of a specific ethnic group from a particular territory.
Okay.
It often involves violence, intimidation, and displacement,
Right.
with the goal of creating ethnically homogenous regions.
So it seems like based on that definition, the Trail of Tears would fit.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
We're talking about the systematic expulsion of 5 distinct Native American tribes from their ancestral homelands.
The forced removals, the horrific conditions of the journeys,
Right.
the deliberate separation of families and communities, all of these elements align with the concept of ethnic cleansing.
But genocide implies something more
Right.
than just removing people.
Exactly. Genocide is defined as the intentional and systematic destruction of a racial, ethnic, religious, or national group,
Right.
often with the intent to exterminate them entirely.
So was there a deliberate intent on the part of the U.S. government to completely exterminate the 5 civilized tribes?
Right. Was removal simply about relocation, or was it about eliminating their presence altogether?
Right.
That's the crux of the debate, and it's where things get complicated.
Yeah.
Those who argue for the genocide classification, they point to the devastating consequences of the removal policies.
Yeah.
The thousands who died on the forced marches, the intentional destruction of their homes and crops,
Wow.
the suppression of their cultures and languages. They argue that these actions weren't just about pushing them off their land, but about erasing them as a people.
It's a really compelling argument when you consider the brutality and the calculated nature of the removals.
Right.
It's hard to imagine it being anything else.
Right. But those who hesitate to use the term genocide argue that while the removal policies were undeniably brutal and unjust, the government's primary goal wasn't necessarily extermination.
Okay.
They point to the fact that some tribes, like the Chickasaw, were able to negotiate financial compensation for their land,
Right.
and that the government did establish Indian Territory as a designated homeland for the removed tribes.
So their argument is that it was more about forced assimilation.
Exactly, an attempt to absorb Native Americans into white society.
Even though it was a tragically misguided and destructive approach.
Absolutely. They believe that while the government may have been indifferent to the suffering caused by the removals, their intent wasn't outright extermination.
And I imagine there's a range of perspectives within Native American communities as well.
Oh, absolutely. Some Native Americans believe that genocide accurately reflects the horrors they endured,
Right.
while others feel it minimizes the fact that they survived, that their cultures and languages persist.
Right. It's a really complicated issue.
It's a deeply personal and nuanced conversation.
It seems like there's no easy answer.
Right.
No single term that can really encompass the complexity and magnitude of this tragedy.
I agree, and I think it's more important to focus on understanding the multifaceted nature of this event and its lasting impact,
Okay.
rather than getting caught up in semantics. The Trail of Tears was a horrific chapter in American history, regardless of what label we choose to put on it.
So where do we go from here? How do we reconcile these different perspectives and move towards a more meaningful understanding of the Trail of Tears and its legacy?
I think it starts with acknowledging the truth of what happened, both the atrocities and the resilience.
Yeah.
It means listening to the stories of those who were directly impacted and allowing those narratives to shape our understanding of this historical trauma.
And it's not just about remembering the past.
Right.
It's about taking responsibility for the present and working towards a more just and equitable future for Native American communities.
Exactly. That means supporting Native American self-determination, honoring treaty rights, investing in their communities, and promoting the revitalization of their cultures and languages. It means recognizing their inherent sovereignty and working together to address the ongoing legacies of injustice.
And I think it also means kind of a shift in perspective. We need to move away from seeing Native American history as a separate, isolated narrative.
Yeah.
And recognize that it's really integral to the American story.
I couldn't agree more. Native American history is American history.
Yeah.
And by understanding their stories, their struggles, their triumphs, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, our nation, and the complexities of the human experience.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Trail of Tears,
Yeah.
I'm left with a mix of emotions, sadness, anger, but also a profound sense of admiration for the resilience of the Native American people.
Absolutely.
You know, they endured unimaginable suffering, yet continue to persevere, to fight for their rights, and to keep their cultures alive.
And I hope this conversation has sparked a desire in you to learn more, to explore the rich and diverse histories of the 5 civilized tribes, and to engage with the issues that Native American communities face today, because understanding the past is essential for shaping a more just and equitable future.
Well said. And on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.